Well, thank you very much for having me here. I feel that I feel your father. I feel that he, in his creation of the foundation, was at a similar stage in life. And I feel that his life arc was very similar in many ways to my life arc. You know, he's a man who built a business, and then later in his stage of life thought about his transition and thought about passing things along, and then created a foundation. And I think that life exists in 3 stages. In the first stage, you're dependent on others, you're learning, you know, you're a student, and then you go into the second stage where you're working, and others are dependent on you, and you're trying to be successful. And then when you get to the stage that I am in my life, and when your father was in his life, that your greatest joy is in having other people be successful without you, to pass along those thoughts. And so he created this foundation, and he created a forum in which people could come and do that. And so I feel like I'm very much in his footsteps in passing that along. So I feel particularly pleased, honored to be here to do that. Thank you very much. So that one thing that I did that her father didn't do, and that I really want to encourage other people to do, is to write down my principles when I was making decisions. So I'm going to talk about principles in general and give you some thoughts. I think the most important thing is that you have your own principles, not that you have my principles. So the main thing that I would like to convey that I did that was very helpful was to, every time I was in a decision, that I would write down my criteria for making those decisions, sort of my recipes for handling that particular type of thing. Because I would observe that the same thing would happen over and over again. And if I could write down those principles clearly and articulate them to others, I was able to have communication with others, I'd be able to reflect on them, and I started to think in a principled way. And I would also be in a position where people would understand what mattered to me, what my principles were. And so over a period of time, I did that, and this book is nothing more, really, than a collection of those that I built over that period of time. And so here I am at 69 years old, feeling I'm at that stage of life, and these principles that I learned helped me, and I'm passing them along. And that's basically what it is. And I think that they would help you if you wrote them down, because you would communicate with others. And also, you know, you will know what your principles are. You'll stand for them. And I think that's particularly true as we sometimes lose sight of our principles. In past periods, you know, maybe it was religion, maybe it was other things that made our principles clear. And so by reflecting on them, I think that's really advantageous. I also did something else. I learned that if I wrote the principles clearly enough, I could put them into equations, algorithms. So I first did that with investing. When I would take my criteria for making decisions, I would write those down and put them into algorithms, and then by being able to see how those algorithms worked over time, I could gain a perspective that I wouldn't have if my decision-making rules were not so clear. And I was able to take those algorithms and then build decision-making systems in which information is taken in from all over, and that decisions are made in parallel with me for decision-making. So algorithmic decision-making and collecting data is something I'm going to talk about, but it's been a very important thing. So the power of writing down decisions and perhaps converting them into equations or algorithms is something that I suggest and I recommend for you, and just so that you know your principles, communicate them well, and perhaps even use them in your decision-making process. So the way the world works, this is sort of a way I think about it, is there are so many subjects that everybody knows about, and there's parenting and physics and nature and medicine and architecture and so many different things, and I don't know anything about any of those. But in the area of building an organization and economics and investment, that's my game. So those are my nature of my principles. The first book that I wrote is the collection of my life and work principles. The second book, which is coming out, are economic and investment principles. But I want to convey what my nature is and how I've approached it. And so this is what life looks like to me, I wanted to go after my audacious goals, my big goals. I wanted to get the most out of life that I can get out of life, and I wanted to stretch in a big way to have those audacious goals. And that along those, I had my successes and my failures. And my failures were more important than my successes in learning. I learned that. Now, people feel bad about their failures. But over having enough of them and practicing them, particularly in the markets, was something that changed my perspective about failing. In particular, it became, every time I would have a failure, I would reflect on it. I say pain plus reflection equals progress. And it became like a puzzle, that if I could solve a puzzle, I would get a gem. And the puzzle was, what would I do differently in the future that would make me make a better outcome in the future? Can I learn a lesson from that? And the gem was these principles that I would write down and save so that when the next thing came along, I would be better suited for that, make better decisions. And that so it's the learning of principles and the writing them down, which has this compounded effect in learning. And then I would improve, and then I would go on to more audacious goals. And so life looked like this looping process, a continuous looping process. And so I've come to believe, basically, that there's 5 steps in order to be successful. That if you do these 5 steps, you'll be successful. And they are, of course, you go after your goals. And on the way to your goals, you're going to have problems. You're going to have impediments to your goals. And those impediments and problems and failures also may be due to your weaknesses or somebody else's weaknesses. And that by understanding those weaknesses and so on, you have a power to get around those weaknesses. And they may be other problems. But whatever the problem is, when you're headed to your goal, that you identify and not tolerate your problems, so that you then move on to the third step, which is to diagnose those problems and get at their root cause. That root cause can be your weaknesses, it can be whatever it is. Once you understand and diagnose that to its root cause, then only with that specificity can you then get around those problems. So you create a design to get around the problems. And with that design, then, of course, if you have a design, you have to do the design. You have to implement it. So I'm saying 5 steps to being successful. You have to know what your goals are, your big, audacious goals. You will encounter your problems on the way to your goals. You will have to not tolerate those problems. You have to diagnose those to get at their root cause, whatever that is. Once you know the root cause, you have the design of that root cause of getting around that thing. And then you push through and you do it over and over again. And that experience, your learning, then moves further along. And the thing about it is everybody, nobody can do it all well. Everybody fails at some of those goals. But that doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is that you don't have to do it yourself. That when you know what your weaknesses are and what other people know, and you can draw upon others who are strong where you're weak, then you have the capacity to not be limited by your own limitations. And that is very much a part of that process. So what I want to do, oh, I'm hitting the wrong button, excuse me. What I want to do is take you through one of my great failures, and I want to take you through one of my great failures so that you feel my failure and you understand what it was like. So in 1980, 81, I had calculated that American banks had lent far more money to countries than those countries were going to be able to pay back, and that we were going to have a debt crisis. And with that debt crisis would be an economic crisis. And I thought that economic crisis was going to be terrible. Now, my point of view was a very controversial point of view. And as a result, I got a lot of media attention. And then in August 1982, Mexico defaulted on its debts, and other countries started to default on its debt. And as a result of that, I got more attention. I was asked to testify to Congress, and I was asked to speak on a television station at the time, which was popular, Wall Street Week. And I just want to give you a clip from there to give you a flavor for that.
Señor presidente, señor Mitchell, es un gran placer y un honor estar ante ustedes para analizar qué va mal en nuestra economía. La economía ahora está plana, se balancea al borde del fracaso. Hace poco fue citado en un artículo. Dijo, puedo decir con absoluta certeza, porque yo sé cómo funciona el mercado, puedo decir con absoluta certeza que si miran la base de liquidez en las empresas y en el mundo en su conjunto, verán un nivel tan reducido de liquidez que no podrán volver a una era de estanflación.
Wasn't I arrogant? I was so incredibly arrogant. I look at that and I think, I could not have been more wrong. That was the exact bottom in the stock market. I lost money for me. I lost money for clients. I only had a small company at the time, 8 people. I had to let those 8 people go. And I was so broke that I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad. That was painful. That was painful. But it was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, because it had changed my way of approach to decision making. It started me to ask myself, how do I know I'm right? It gave me a humility that I needed to balance with my audacity. And as a result of that, it changed my approach to decision making that made me become more successful in my decision making. Because by thinking, how do I know I'm right, I started to do things differently. I started to find the smartest people I could who would disagree with me, to try to understand their perspective. I diversified, and I did a number of things. But most importantly, I developed the fear of being wrong without losing the audacity to do great things. And that uncertainty made me raise my probabilities of being right. Because look, if you disagree with somebody, somebody must be wrong. And how do you know that wrong person isn't you? I think the greatest challenge that most people have, and the greatest probably tragedy of mankind, because it could be so easily fixed, is people holding wrong opinions confidently in their head and not stress testing those opinions. So I built my company in a different way. How do I know I'm right? So I built a certain culture. Oh, I'm going to skip these. Okay, I built a certain culture. What I wanted was, I wanted to go after my audacious goals, but I wanted independent thinkers who also had audacious goals, who were in it with me, so that we would challenge each other. Look, in order to be successful in the markets, you have to bet against the consensus and be right. And that's because the consensus is built into the price. So if you don't have a different view, you won't make any money. And in order to be an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur, you have to think differently. You have to bet against the consensus and be right. And it's difficult to bet against the consensus and be right. So it was important to me to bring in independent thinkers who we would have these thoughtful disagreements with. And then, in order to do that well, I had to create a system in which we have thoughtful disagreement. So I had to create an idea meritocracy. When I refer to an idea meritocracy, I mean a system in which thoughtful disagreement is brought to the surface and used to do well to make better decisions that way. So I needed to build an idea meritocracy. We needed to systemize those, write principles and systems that made part of that process. And then we would have our successes and our failures and our learning, and that would produce results. We produced happy clients and happy employees as a result of doing that, and that produced going on. And since that moment in 1982, when I was so wrong and I changed my approach to decision making, we didn't have those types of problems anymore. So that type of approach, that idea meritocracy, has been so valuable, and I want to pass it along. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is to pass it along because it's very powerful in trying to be successful. So, what do I mean by having an idea meritocracy? How does an idea meritocracy work? You need to have three things, basically, to have an idea meritocracy. The first is you have to put your honest thoughts out there. In other words, maybe they're uncomfortable. If you don't think somebody's doing something right, or you have to listen to each other's thoughts, and they have to be totally honest. When you can at least understand what the other person's thinking by being accurate, you're going to get at least what's true, what people are thinking. And if you don't get what people are honestly thinking, it's going to obscure quality decision making, and you won't be able to work it through to get a better decisions. And the second thing is that you have to understand the art of thoughtful disagreement. You know, when a lot of people disagree, they get angry at each other. You know, you can go into a restaurant, somebody can say, I like the food. Somebody's reluctant to say, I don't like the food. If you have disagreement, instead, if you have curiosity, and you can explore that, and you could do it with protocols that allow thoughtful disagreement, you raise the probability of being right. And then the third thing you need to do is to create agreed upon protocols that are idea meritocratic to get beyond disagreement. We have what we call believability weighted decision making. What it means is it's not democracy and it's not autocracy, but it is knowing which people are good and bad at different things, and to try to weigh that way of getting past those things. So this idea of an idea meritocracy and having thoughtful disagreement and pursuing these audacious goals has been, invaluable. It's the basis for success. I went from nothing to something with this business following that particular process. So another key thing is you have to understand your own and others' strengths and weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. But people hide those weaknesses rather than look at those weaknesses. So understanding accurately. So the question is, my point is, when you know what somebody is like, you can know what you can expect of them. And so it's better for individual development. By knowing your weaknesses, you can move beyond it. And also it means that you put people in the right roles. So what I want to do is give you a little window into what it's like to work at Bridgewater by taking you into a meeting and showing you how we're making decisions. And what I did was to create a number of tools that facilitate operating by this. Because, you could speak theoretically that you should operate like this. But when you have tools that facilitate operating like that, it will naturally happen. So I'm going to take you into a meeting, and I'm going to show you one of our tools, which I call a dot collector, and it gathers what different people are thinking, and it uses that to help them in their decision thinking, as well as being able to help them make decisions. So this is what it looks like.
Una semana tras las elecciones de Estados Unidos, nuestro equipo de investigación se reunió para hablar sobre la presidencia de Trump y la economía estadounidense. Naturalmente, la gente tenía distintas opiniones al respecto y sobre cómo abordaríamos la discusión. El colector de puntos recolectó estos puntos de vista. Tiene una lista de varias decenas de atributos, así que cada vez que alguien piensa algo sobre las ideas de otra persona, es fácil para ellos transmitir su evaluación simplemente seleccionando el atributo y calificándolo del 1 al 10. Por ejemplo, cuando la reunión empezó, Jen, una investigadora, me calificó un 3. En otras palabras, mal. Por no mostrar un buen equilibrio de mente abierta y asertividad. A medida que transcurrió la reunión, las evaluaciones de Jen transcurrieron así. Otros allí tuvieron diferentes opiniones. Es normal. Diferentes personas siempre van a tener diferentes opiniones. ¿Y quién sabe quién tiene razón? Veamos lo que la gente pensaba de cómo estaba. Algunas personas pensaron que lo hice bien, otros no. Con todas estas opiniones podemos explorar el pensamiento que hay detrás de los números. Aquí está lo que dijeron Jen y Larry. Tengan en cuenta que todos expresan sus pensamientos, incluyendo su pensamiento crítico, independientemente de su posición en la compañía. Jen tiene 24 años y acaba de salir de la universidad, y me puede decir a mí, el CEO, que tengo un enfoque terrible. Esta herramienta ayuda a las personas a expresar sus opiniones y luego separarlas de sus opiniones para verlas a un nivel más alto. Cuando Jen y otros cambian su atención de introducir sus propias opiniones a ver toda la pantalla, sus perspectivas cambian. Ven sus propias opiniones como solo una de muchas y naturalmente empiezan a preguntarse, ¿cómo sé si mi opinión es acertada? Ese cambio en la perspectiva es como pasar de mirar en una dimensión a mirar en múltiples dimensiones. Y cambia la conversación desde argumentar nuestras opiniones a encontrar criterios objetivos para determinar qué opiniones son las mejores. Detrás del colector de puntos hay una computadora que observa todo lo que estas personas piensan y correlaciona esto con cómo lo piensan y ofrece consejos a cada uno basado en ello. Luego, dibuja los datos de todas las reuniones para crear una imagen de puntos de cómo son las personas y cómo piensan. Y hace esto guiado por algoritmos. Saber cómo son las personas nos ayuda a asignarlas mejor a sus trabajos. Por ejemplo, un pensador creativo que no es fiable puede ser puesto con alguien que es fiable pero no es creativo. Saber cómo son las personas también nos permite decidir qué responsabilidades darles y medir nuestras decisiones basándonos en el mérito de las personas. Lo llamamos credibilidad. Aquí hay un ejemplo de un voto que tomamos donde la mayoría de la gente se sentía de una manera. Pero si medimos las opiniones basadas en la credibilidad, la respuesta es muy distinta. Este proceso nos permite tomar decisiones no basadas en la democracia, ni basadas en la autocracia, sino en algoritmos que consideran la credibilidad de las personas.
We really do that. So I want to point out some of the things there again. That anybody in the company could criticize anybody in a non-hierarchical way. So Jen, 24 years old out of school, feels totally free to criticize me, and I value that because I want to know what she thinks. She's thinking it. I want to value it. Then, when everybody goes into the screen and goes above, they observe that everybody's seeing things differently. So the perspective changes because they say, how do I know that my perspective is right? Interesting question. Then we go into criteria. So all that's data, and it shows how people think differently. So the collection of the data over a period of time helps people know how people think differently, because you set an algorithm and you say, how do people think differently? Then, based on that, the iPad is dealing with you like a person is dealing with you, like a coach, because it has all that information, that collective knowledge, and it's dealing with you to coach you through that meeting, and you could take the response to that. So it gives you an idea meritocratic way of operating. Also, when we make a decision, rather than just make a decision in an autocratic or democratic way, in other words, in a way where the boss makes the decision or the employee, one man, one vote. I've been in both kinds of decisions. That the credibility of each person is shown to try to help the better decision. I know when I make a decision, and I'm making a decision, and 3 credible people disagree with me, I'm not going to go make that decision carelessly. I want to know why they can make that decision better than me. And that raises the idea meritocracy. And it creates better relationships. By my aspiration, Bridgewater, my company, in one sentence, is an idea meritocracy in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. I want an idea meritocracy so the best ideas win out. I value equally the meaningful work, in other words, the mission, be on a mission together to do great things and be excited about that mission, and the meaningful relationships that you can have on that mission. I value them equally. And they reinforce each other. Because if you're on that mission and you're tough with each other, that's called tough love, you can be tough with each other and hold each other accountable if you know that you really care and you demonstrate that you really care in that relationship. So meaningful work and meaningful relationship. And then radical truthfulness and radical transparency. Because radical truthfulness about saying what you mean and actually sticking to that, that's what you really mean, builds trust and builds clarity. It's very, very powerful. And the radical transparency, so that all people can see what's going on, eliminates the idea of spin. I mean, literally what we do is record most meetings and let everybody listen to those meetings so they could see things in that way. And we take it to an extreme. So the question is about this. What is the barrier? What's the problem? We have 2 U's in us, emotionally. A neuroscientist, psychologist have told me this, and this is the way it is. There is the intellectual you that wants certain things, and there's the emotional you, subliminal, that wants something else. So if I was to say, would you like to know what I really think? Would you like to know your weaknesses? Would you like to know your weaknesses? Intellectually, you would say, of course I want to know my weaknesses, because if I know my weaknesses, I can deal with them. I can be stronger about it. Would I like to know what you think? Of course I'd like to know what you think, because I can then deal with it rather than have it obscure. So why don't you do that? Because sometimes when you look at your weaknesses, it's uncomfortable. And we particularly operate in a society that makes it uncomfortable. This perfectionistic society in which nobody makes any mistakes. And you all are pretending rather than dealing with those things. So that struggle. So when people think, do I want to come to this place, Bridgewater, they have to then deal with that issue. And they know that they're going to go through that struggle of their 2 U's, and they move forward. But that has been the secret of our success in terms of having an idea meritocracy. I would say in all relationships, you have to define how you're going to be with each other. This has nothing to do with just my company, and has nothing to do with my industry, and it has nothing to do just even with whether it's business. It has to do with all relationships. Like, do you want to be radically truthful with each other? Do you want to know what your weaknesses are? So by writing down those principles of how you're going to be with each other and dealing with that, you can take approaches, I think, that are such. I wanted to just pass this way along. Like, this may not be for you. But I think you're going to have to ask yourself, I hope, when you go away and you leave this, 4 questions. Do you want idea meritocratic decision making? If you're running an organization or even in a relationship or whatever, how do you want to make decisions? Do you want to make idea meritocratic decisions on a non-hierarchical, but just get at the best decisions and suspend your own, or not? You'll make that choice. Do you want to know what people are really like? Your own weaknesses, your own strengths? Do you want to do that, and in what degree? To what degree do you want truthfulness, this radical truthfulness and the radical transparency? To what degree do you want them? You have to decide on your own principles. And then, to what degree do you want algorithmic decision making? We are now in a different era. You are leaving data about yourself all over the place, and anybody can collect that data practically and know what you're like better than sometimes your best friends. They can really, and you take that data, and you are in a world of algorithmic decision making. I mean, literally, quite often, you're interacting with computers in ways that you think that there's a person on the other side of that. So we are in this era, and how you choose to use it and what you choose to do is up to you. This is just a circle of various tools we've developed, and I'm going to make them all public. I'm going to make that dot collector that you saw in the meeting free and available to anybody in the world who wants it, so that then you'll be playing with it, right? It'll be a little bit of an adventure. I mean, think about it. You're going to go into a meeting, and you're going to see what other people are thinking, and then you're going to deal with how you're going to deal with that. Anyway, that's it in a nutshell. It's fleshed out more in the book, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have about any of these things. Thank you.